Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about developers and all the things. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, developers are expected to contribute in many different ways. Front-end, back-end, DevOps, data architecture, etc. How is that possible? The number of requirements and design meetings alone would be a full-time job. Well, yes. And yes and yes. Developers usually are expected to do all these things. And it really comes down to how the one part is how much money does the company who is doing the hiring have to hire specialists, and to what extent, like how organized are they? That's the one part. And the other part is what are the requirements of working within the company? How does their digital infrastructure look? Because in practice, this is what I've said in many videos, and you should never ever question me on this. I argue. Well, you can, of course, but I believe that you, in this specific regard, I'm going to be correct. It does not matter, guys, what you think your job is, because when you take a job at an IT company, what it all comes down to is what are the practical daily tasks that are necessary for you to master in order to do the job at that specific company. And this is not unique to us software developers. I'll give us that we have a little bit of a harder time sometimes here, but guys, I promise you, if you ask your friends or something like that, how is it to work for, like, are they usually taking on tasks that are outside of their job specifications? I'm pretty sure you have a few friends who work in all kinds of areas that have that and can like relate to that, where all of a sudden the company does something different, or there's a new process or something like that, and they don't, like the planners and the managers and so forth, they're not checking in on that or anything like that. They're basically a lot of the stuff that is working within their work environment might just be down to some person who's just actually doing a job that they're not supposed to be doing, or they're helping out or something like that. And for us software developers, there's no difference here. I would even go as far as to say that when you get to a certain level of proficiency, you're basically expected to be able to take that holistic responsibility. It is what happens when you become a true senior, as I call it, an individual who companies hire in order to basically know how to get results, and that's the key thing, which is also something that I've said before, guys. Results is what matters. Everything else is secondary. So when the front-end developers say that I don't know about Node, for example, or they don't know about CSS, etc., what they're basically saying is that I will only be able to do these things. That hurts them long term usually, and in many cases they might not even get a job because they basically stated that I don't know these sorts of things. And the unfortunate situation, guys, is that it does not matter what you don't know. What matters is, does the company have the technical situation to allow you to not know this stuff, or do they actually have to find someone who knows it? And that's the endless problem. And that's why all of these things can end up on your plate. I promise you, try being a startup. Try being in a young startup without someone like this. I can basically guarantee you that most of the stuff that you talked about here are going to be on your plate, because basically there is no one else. You can't find all the specialists that you need. You either don't have the budget or time or so forth, so people sort of have to ship in and like help out with all the things. So as I said, the reason why this happens is primarily because how the company is structured. If you don't have tons of specialists, and you don't, and I mean, even when you do have work for big companies where they do have specialists, it doesn't matter, because the company has structured the organization in an inefficient way, which leaves you in a situation where practically you're still on your own, because even though you have the specialists, they don't have time because they're stretched too thin, or they're not working with your specific department, or they're focusing on other problems, etc., etc. It's all this complicated hybrid between, do you have the people that can do all these things, and do you have the management structure that they can actually do this thing on behalf of other people. And for us software developers, it's more usually the case that you're basically left with figure it out. That's what you need to do. And yeah, the number of requirements are potentially astronomical. To be frank with you, potentially it is astronomical. The thing that is good though is, guys, that it's practically impossible to find people who know all the things like this. There are people like that. I've met them, and it's not like there's no one who knows practically everything. There's usually you have people who are either more back-end oriented or front-end oriented or things like that. But usually you'll find someone who can do the job well enough, and that's usually what the companies are aiming for. They put basically all the requirements on there, and they hope to find someone who's close enough. And then every once in a blue moon, they find someone who can basically do everything. But that's very rare. And so yes, it is a full-time job to do all of these sorts of things, and that's where you will find the people who usually do most of the stuff are people who are at the higher level. Like they've transitioned from being like pure, like they're not junior developers, they're not mid-level developers. They're usually people who have a fair bit of personal drive and a fair bit of experience within the industry, and they're usually involved in multiple projects, or they're helping out within some area that is specifically critical to a given company, because some companies have problems with different areas, and usually when they have a problem with something, you put a person like this who basically takes charge of everything in charge, and have them sort of structure everything and make everything nice and clean. Such as like operations is a common one. You're usually hiring specialists for this sort of thing and to make sure that everything works nicely and so forth. But it's not exclusive to this area. It really comes down to what does the company, or like the business side of the company, perceive as being a problem within the organization, and then they usually focus on trying to find people who have a very diverse and very strong skill set to help out with that specific thing. And that's usually where like they hire less like mid-levels and like regular software developers for the stuff that they can handle, and then if they have an issue, as I said, where they basically need a super person, then they increase the salaries for that person until they can find someone who can sort of fill that role. But yes, you are right, it becomes a full-time job. So what I want you to take away from this is that yes, potentially as a software developer you have to do all the things. It is that simple, because it really comes down to results, as I said, guys, and it's really that simple. To the vast majority of IT companies, guys, they don't know how to run an IT company efficiently. They don't know how to structure things, etc., etc. They need good engineers for that. The problem with getting good engineers is that they are scarce, and not all engineers are made equal, which means that if you have poor engineers, especially in the beginning, this is where all the legacy and all that stuff comes in. If you have people who design a poorly run system, and you have poor management where they might not structure the organization in an efficient way, you need more and more people, or you need people who basically have to know everything, because the inefficiency of how the companies run dictates it. It's the same thing in any organization. I promise you, if you want to have a similar sort of experience, go and talk to tech support or people who work in different industries where basically the companies run so inefficiently that they have to basically know everything on behalf of their customers and on behalf of their managers, because the entire organization has been, well, designed that way, where it's basically a part of the job in order to work in that environment. And unfortunately, it is what it is, as I like to say. And for you as a junior level developer or a mid-level developer or something like that, you don't have to worry so much about this sort of stuff, because usually the companies that are as desperate as trying to find someone who has all the skills and so forth, they're usually like, the dangerous part is you can get into such a company, you can start at a company, and they you don't really know that this is the case until they start getting you work, and all of a sudden you realize that you have to do everything about everything. And sometimes that does happen, unfortunately. But you should also know that that's not necessarily a bad thing for you. It might be very stressful depending on the company, and you should not, like, if it starts affecting you mentally, you should really think about that. But you should also know that that's sort of what the end state becomes sooner or later for you in many cases. It's not that common that you go to the higher levels of programming where you might be architects, or like you depending on the company now, of course. But a lot of companies are looking for these more holistic profiles that basically can do all the things. So, and they usually pay them pretty well if they find these sorts of people, and they usually lead things, or they make sure that projects are successful, they reorganize the organization, etc., etc. And that is definitely a full-time job. It's not like they can do everything at the same time. It really comes down to what does the company need at that exact moment, and do they sort of have the skill set to fix that. It's very common that you have very, very senior profiles who are like architects or back-end developers, sort of like set up technical roadmaps, or you might have front-end specialists or so forth and so forth for different companies depending on what their specific business needs are. And these people, as I said, they do exist, but you don't have to worry usually that that's going to be you on your first gig. Have a great day.